Imagine a time long ago in the vast windswept steppes of Mongolia, a time when the world was divided, fragmented into warring tribes, empires, clashing for power and the fate of entire civilizations hanging by a thread. Now, what if I told you that one man against all odds would rise from these harsh conditions, leading his people to conquer a land larger than any empire in history? What if I told you that this man's legacy would shape the world for centuries to come, influencing everything from trade to culture, politics to warfare? This man was none other than Genghis Khan. From humble beginnings, born as Temujin in 1162, he would become one of the most feared, revered, and controversial figures in history. Genghis Khan was not just a conqueror, he was a visionary, a leader who unified the Mongol tribes, built a military machine that changed the art of war, and forged an empire that stretched across Asia and into Europe. His empire became the largest contiguous empire the world has ever seen, forever altering the course of history. But who was this man really? What drove him to achieve the unimaginable, and what is his true legacy? In this video, we will delve deep into the life of Genghis Khan, exploring his rise from a young boy, facing tremendous adversity, to becoming the supreme ruler of a world-spanning empire. We will follow his legendary military campaigns, examining the strategies and tactics that made him an unparalleled warlord. But we will also take a closer look at the human side of Genghis Khan, the relationships he built, the way he governed, and the lasting impact he had on the cultures and societies he encountered. From the brutal conquests that brought entire cities to their knees to the creation of a legal and administrative system that still influences modern governance, Genghis Khan's story is one of both destruction and creation, of ruthless war and visionary leadership. So what can you expect from this video? Over the next 2 to 3 hours, we will embark on an epic journey through this video, each uncovering a different aspect of Genghis Khan's life career and the empire he built. We'll explore his early years, his rise to power, the military strategies that made him a legend, the cultural exchanges his empire fostered, and the remarkable legacy that endures to this day. But before we dive into the incredible story of Genghis Khan, I have one small favor to ask. If you're excited to learn more about this fascinating historical figure and explore how he changed the course of history, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps me create more content like this, and it also lets me know you're ready to join me on this epic journey through the life of one of the most influential figures in history. So, without further ado, let's embark on this journey together. Join me as we explore the life, career, and legacy of Genghis Khan, a man who rose from the ashes of a broken world to leave a mark that will never be forgotten. Let's dive in. Genghis Khan, born as Temujin in 1162, emerged from the vast rugged steppes of Mongolia, a land shaped by harsh winters, nomadic traditions, and constant tribal conflict. His birth was anything but ordinary. The story of Temujin's arrival into the world, though veiled in myth, reflects the larger-than-life legacy he would one day leave. It is said that when he was born, he grasped a blood clot in his hand, an omen interpreted by some as a sign of his destiny to shed blood and conquer lands. This symbolic birth marked the beginning of a man who would come to dominate not only the Mongol steppes, but vast parts of Asia and Europe. Temujin was born into the Burjigin clan, a noble Mongol family. His father Yisugai was a prominent leader and a member of the Mongol aristocracy. Yisugai's marriage to Huelin, a woman of common birth, made Temujin's early life marked by the tension between nobility and the commoner's struggle. Despite the challenges, Temujin's early years were relatively privileged, surrounded by the traditions and leadership of his clan. However, the security of his birthright would soon be shattered by an event that would change the course of his life forever. Temujin's family, like many Mongol families at the time, was deeply connected to the complex network of tribal alliances and rivalries. The Mongol tribes were not a unified force, but were a collection of individual groups, each vying for control and power. Temujin's father, Yisugai, was a respected leader within the Karat tribe, and his family's prospects seemed bright. However, life in the steppes was anything but stable. Tribes frequently warred alliances were fleeting, and power could be lost in the blink of an eye. When Temujin was just a young boy, his father was poisoned by a rival tribe, the Tatar. This sudden loss plunged the young boy and his family into immediate peril. Yisugai's death left the family vulnerable. Without their protector, the family fell prey to their rivals, and they were forced to flee from their home. At the time of his father's death, Temujin was barely 9 years old, and he found himself in the midst of a world where power survival and leadership were constantly in flux. With his father's death, Temujin's family was ostracized by their tribe. The young boy, along with his mother Hoylin and his siblings, were cast out into the wilderness. They had to survive with minimal resources, struggling against the unforgiving environment of the Mongolian steppes, where food was scarce and danger lurked at every turn. The betrayal of the clan, the loss of their status, and the daily struggles to survive in the harsh conditions of the steppes were formative experiences that shaped Temujin's worldview. This period in Temujin's early life was marked by intense hardship. The betrayal by their own people, by those who once called themselves allies, was not just a matter of survival, but of honor. As a child, Temujin learned that power was fleeting and that leadership could be lost overnight if one was not vigilant, resourceful, and strong. He saw firsthand how easily loyalty could be betrayed and how quickly a family could fall from grace. This harsh reality would stay with him and inform his future approach to leadership, as he would come to value loyalty and unity above all else in his adult life. Temujin's early years were also shaped by the fractured state of the Mongol tribes. There was no single Mongol identity at the time, just a vast network of competing tribes, each with its own leaders, customs, and conflicts. This fragmented world made Temujin's path to power that much more complicated. He had to navigate the treacherous politics of the Mongol steppes, learning to read people, form alliances, and build loyalty from those who were initially his enemies. He would later use this keen sense of strategy to unite the Mongol tribes, forging an empire from the very chaos that had threatened to destroy his family. The loss of his father, combined with the tribal conflicts that marked his early life, set the stage for Temujin's transformation. It was through these experiences that he developed a profound understanding of loyalty power and the importance of trust. His early struggles gave him the resilience to persevere, and they shaped his leadership style, which would later make him one of history's most successful and ruthless conquerors. Temujin's childhood experiences, his father's murder, the family's exile, and the constant threats from rival tribes forced him to mature quickly and learn vital skills for survival. One of the key lessons he learned was the importance of personal loyalty. In the harsh world of the Mongol steppes, loyalty was both a precious and fragile commodity. A tribe's strength rested not just on its numbers, but on the unity of its people. Temujin saw that tribal loyalty could be manipulated, broken, or betrayed at any time, and this would influence how he later structured his own leadership. Where others may have seen adversity, Temujin saw opportunity. He realized that to unite the Mongol tribes, he would need to inspire loyalty and respect among his followers, something that would not come through bloodlines alone. Temujin understood that leadership was not about birthright or noble ancestry. It was about the ability to command respect, to protect and provide for those who followed you, and to inspire a sense of shared purpose. He would later build a system of meritocracy within his ranks, allowing individuals of low birth to rise through the ranks based on their loyalty and capabilities, rather than their family name or social status. His experiences also taught him the value of ruthlessness when necessary. The constant tribal infighting meant that weakness was quickly exploited and only the strongest survived. To be a successful leader in this environment, one had to be willing to make often brutal decisions. Temujin would later demonstrate this ruthlessness on a grand scale, especially in his military campaigns, where no mercy would be shown to those who defied him. This was not just a matter of survival, but of maintaining control over his growing empire. One of the most profound influences on Temujin's early development was his mother, Hoelun. Hoelun was a remarkable woman, strong, resilient, and fiercely protective of her children. After the death of her husband, she became the rock upon which Temujin's survival depended. Hoelun's influence on her son cannot be overstated. In an era when women were often sidelined in political and military affairs, she stood out as a powerful figure in her own right. Hoelun was instrumental in teaching Temujin the values of resilience and perseverance. Despite their dire circumstances, she never gave up on her children and made sure they never lost sight of their potential. Hoelun ensured that Temujin remained focused on the goal of survival, providing him with the emotional support and strength he needed to keep going, even when all seemed lost. She also instilled in him a deep sense of family loyalty, which would later become the cornerstone of his leadership style. Hoelun's resilience also shaped Temujin's views on leadership and governance. She was not only a mother, but a mentor, teaching him to be patient, to think strategically, and to always keep his eyes on the long-term goal. Her ability to navigate the harsh realities of the Mongol steppes and maintain her family's survival in such a turbulent time was something that Temujin would carry with him throughout his life. Furthermore, Hoelun's influence extended beyond her immediate family. She had a reputation for wisdom and strength, and her guidance helped shape Temujin's worldview. Temujin would often look to her for counsel in times of uncertainty, and her lessons on patience, perseverance, and loyalty would serve him well in the future as he faced the monumental challenges of uniting the Mongol tribes and building an empire. The early life of Genghis Khan. Born Temujin was marked by tremendous hardship, but it was these very struggles that shaped him into the leader he would become. The loss of his father, the betrayal by his tribe, the constant threat of death and famine, and the influence of his mother all played pivotal roles in molding the character of one of history's greatest conquerors. These experiences instilled in him a deep understanding of loyalty, resilience, and leadership values that would serve as the foundation for his later success. In the next sections, we will explore how Temujin used these early lessons to rise from the ashes of his childhood and forge an empire that would change the world forever. The Mongol society that Genghis Khan was born into was deeply structured with a complex hierarchy and a powerful sense of loyalty within the tribes. To understand how he rose to power, it's essential to explore the foundation of Mongol social organization and the role of the Khan, the supreme leader. At the heart of Mongol society were tribes, large kinship-based groups that formed the foundation of Mongol culture. The Mongols, like many nomadic societies, were organized around extended families which formed clans. A clan could consist of a few hundred individuals, all sharing a common ancestor and bound by mutual loyalty and kinship. These tribes and clans were constantly in flux, with alliances shifting and disputes arising over resources, territory, and leadership. The highest position within each tribe was the Khan, the leader who commanded respect, loyalty, and power. The role of the Khan was both political and military. The Khan's primary responsibility was to protect the tribe, lead them in battle, and manage the relationships with other tribes. The Khan's power, however, was not absolute. Leadership was often determined by a mixture of charisma, military prowess, and the ability to gain the loyalty of followers, which was crucial in a society where kinship ties were so strong. In Mongol society, the Khan was more than just a king or ruler. The position was deeply tied to the idea of legitimacy and divine favor. The Khan was expected to have the qualities of a strong warrior and a wise leader. The title was typically passed down through the male lineage, although this could vary depending on the circumstances of the tribe. However, leadership was not guaranteed by birthright alone. The Khan had to prove his ability to rule through strength and wisdom. He had to earn his place. Mongol society was also highly militarized. From a young age, children were trained in the arts of war, horseback riding, archery, and survival. The Mongol lifestyle was rooted in their ability to move swiftly across the steppes, and the survival of their society depended on their mastery of combat. The ability to fight was seen as a central part of the Mongol identity. For many Mongol tribes, there was a constant intertribal rivalry. This meant that power was fluid, and loyalty could be bought and sold. The Khan's strength was always contingent upon the support of his warriors and his ability to manage the internal politics of his tribe. The leadership of a Khan was often challenged by internal factionalism or external threats, which meant that a successful Khan had to be both a fierce warrior and a skilled diplomat. One of the most distinctive features of Mongol society during the time of Genghis Khan was the central role of shamanism in both the everyday life and the governance of the people. Shamanism was not only a religion, but also a guiding force in the spiritual and political aspects of life. The shamans were seen as mediators between the human world and the spiritual realm. They communicated with spirits, performed rituals, and played an essential role in guiding the Mongol people. Shamanism was a deeply animistic belief system, where the natural world, rivers, trees, mountains, and animals, was infused with spiritual significance. The Mongols believed that everything had a spirit, and that the world was governed by forces both seen and unseen. This spirituality helped the Mongols navigate the harsh environment of the steppes, where survival depended on their understanding of nature, timing, and the weather. For the Mongol elite, the shamans held significant influence. They were the spiritual advisors to the Khans, and their blessings were seen as a sign of divine favor. A Khan's legitimacy often rested not only on his military prowess, but also on the approval of the shamans. They would perform rituals to ensure victory in battle, prosperity, in peace, and protection from evil forces. Shamans were also thought to have the ability to predict the future or to provide counsel in times of crisis. Genghis Khan himself was deeply influenced by shamanistic beliefs, although he later incorporated other spiritual practices into his governance. As a young boy, he had a personal encounter with a shaman who foretold his rise to power. This spiritual experience would leave a lasting impression on him and shape his view of leadership. Even as Genghis Khan expanded his empire, he maintained a connection to shamanistic practices, relying on spiritual advisors for guidance and reinforcing the belief that his conquest was not just military, but divinely ordained. This connection to the divine and the spiritual world also helped Genghis Khan consolidate power. The divine right to rule was an important aspect of Mongol leadership, and Genghis Khan was able to claim that his military conquests were sanctioned by the gods. His divine favor was not only a political tool, but also a psychological weapon, helping to inspire awe and loyalty among his followers. Shamanism, with its emphasis on spiritual strength, played an essential role in legitimizing Genghis Khan's rule. The belief in his divine favor made it easier for him to unite the disparate Mongol tribes and solidify his power. The shamans, in a sense, helped pave the way for the rise of the Mongol Empire, giving Genghis Khan the spiritual authority to rule over his people and wage war against his enemies. Before Genghis Khan's rise to power, the Mongol tribes were fragmented and disorganized. Each tribe was led by a Khan, but these leaders were not always able to unite their people. Mongol politics was dominated by tribal rivalries and shifting alliances, and the Khans were often in competition for resources, territory, and influence. This created a highly unstable political landscape where loyalty was fickle and betrayal was common. Mongol tribal politics revolved around the Khan's ability to gain and maintain the loyalty of his followers. This loyalty was not given lightly. A Khan had to demonstrate his strength in battle, his wisdom in governance, and his ability to protect the tribe's interests. A Khan could lose his position if he failed to maintain the support of his warriors or if he lost in battle. Tribal leadership was not static power, shifted frequently depending on the political maneuvering of the Khans and the strength of their followers. This constant shifting of power meant that leadership was always in flux, and the Mongol tribes were constantly at war or in negotiations with one another. Alliances were formed and broken as quickly as the seasons changed, and the Mongol people had to adapt to the ever-changing political landscape. At times, tribes would band together against a common enemy, but more often than not, they were engaged in infighting. Betrayal was not only common, but expected. In such a volatile political environment, the Khans were often forced to make alliances with other tribes to strengthen their position, though these alliances were fragile at best. This state of constant conflict and shifting power created an environment where merit-based leadership became essential. Loyalty was not just about familial ties or traditional allegiance, but about personal merit. A leader's ability to win battles, negotiate alliances, and make his people strong was far more important than his birthright. This made the rise of a figure like Genghis Khan possible. Although Temujin was born into a noble family, he was not automatically destined to rule. He had to fight for his leadership, proving his worth not only through his strength, but through his ability to navigate the complex web of tribal politics. Before Genghis Khan, the Mongol tribes were locked in a cycle of conflict and disunity. However, once Genghis Khan emerged as a leader, he began to reshape Mongol politics. He united the disparate tribes under a single banner, bringing stability to the region for the first time in centuries. He did this by shifting the traditional structures of power, placing emphasis on loyalty, merit, and unity rather than the traditional clan-based structures. His ability to unite the Mongols, previously a fragmented, warring collection of tribes, was a critical step in the rise of the Mongol Empire. The Mongol tribal society was a complex and often brutal system governed by shifting allegiances, constant warfare, and the strong influence of spiritual beliefs. The Khan's role in society was both political and military, and leadership was earned rather than inherited. The spiritual practices of shamanism provided the Mongols with a divine framework for understanding power, and these beliefs helped to legitimize Genghis Khan's rise to leadership. The political landscape was fragmented and power was fluid until a leader like Genghis Khan emerged who could unify the Mongol tribes and change the course of history. His rise was not just a matter of military conquest, but a masterful manipulation of tribal politics, loyalty, and divine authority. In the following sections, we will explore how Genghis Khan used these early experiences to build an empire that would stretch from the steppes of Mongolia to the heart of Europe. The journey from a boy who had lost his father and been cast out into the wilderness to the supreme leader of the Mongol Empire was not an easy one for Temujin. His early life was marked by hardship, betrayal, and survival. But these very struggles would lay the foundation for his remarkable rise to power. Temujin's path to leadership was one filled with battles, both physical and political, that would test his resilience, his wisdom, and his ability to unite his people. After the death of his father, Temujin and his family were abandoned by their tribe, the Burjigin clan, and forced to survive in the harsh environment of the Mongolian steppes. It was a life fraught with danger, but Temujin's early experiences taught him some of the most important lessons of his life: the importance of loyalty, the need for alliances, and the value of personal strength and merit. These lessons would help him build a support network of warriors, allies, and loyal followers, people who believed in his vision of a united Mongol people rather than just the fractured tribes that constantly warred with each other. In the years that followed, Temujin began to gather followers, starting with the people closest to him, such as his blood brother Jebe and other men who shared his hardships and loyalty. This bond of blood brotherhood was significant in Mongol culture, where personal relationships and loyalty were key to success. The concept of the blood brotherhood, or Ande, was a powerful symbol of mutual loyalty and trust, and it would become one of the cornerstones of Temujin's leadership. Temujin's rise to power was not merely about brute force. It was about his ability to forge strategic alliances with other tribes. These alliances were based on shared interests, common enemies, and mutual benefit. One of the first significant alliances he formed was with the Jadaran tribe, which helped him secure a position of greater influence. Over time, Temujin's ability to build trust and gain the loyalty of others became legendary. He understood that a leader could not thrive on his own. He needed to surround himself with capable and loyal people who believed in his vision. What made Temujin stand out among the Mongol Khans was his ability to integrate people of all backgrounds into his growing tribe. He did not care about noble birth. Instead, he rewarded merit and loyalty. His focus on meritocracy, which would become one of the hallmarks of his empire, helped him gather the best warriors and leaders from different tribes, strengthening his position over time. However, the road to power was far from smooth. Temujin faced numerous challenges from other rival Khans who were intent on maintaining their hold over the Mongol tribes. His rivals saw him as a threat and attempted to weaken his growing influence through political maneuvering, betrayal, and military opposition. Temujin had to navigate a delicate balance between forging alliances and defeating rivals, all while ensuring that his loyalty to his followers was never questioned. One of the key factors in Temujin's rise to power was his extraordinary ability to form strategic alliances. At a time when the Mongol tribes were fragmented and constantly at war, alliances were not only critical, but often fragile. In such a volatile political landscape, loyalty was everything. Loyalty to one's leader was the foundation of the Mongol way of life, and Temujin's ability to build and maintain loyalty among his followers became his greatest strength. Temujin understood that loyalty was not something that could be demanded. It had to be earned. He earned the loyalty of his followers not only through his ability to win battles, but also by treating them fairly and justly. He took care of his men, shared in their hardships, and valued their contributions. In return, his men were fiercely loyal to him. This loyalty became a driving force behind his success. His followers knew that their leader would always have their backs, and in return, they fought with unwavering dedication. One of the most significant examples of Temujin's ability to forge loyalty came when he was captured by a rival tribe, the Tatar. After being imprisoned, Temujin managed to escape with the help of his followers, including a former rival who had come to respect him. This act of loyalty reinforced the idea that Temujin was a man worth following. When he returned to his people, he was seen not only as a survivor, but as a leader who had earned the trust and respect of those around him. His ability to form alliances also extended beyond personal relationships. Temujin understood that diplomacy was as important as war, and he often used marriage and strategic alliances to strengthen his position. One of his first major alliances was with Berta, the daughter of a powerful Mongol chieftain. Through this marriage, Temujin gained an influential ally and a strong political connection that would prove invaluable in the years to come. As Temujin's influence grew, so did his need for military support. He was not afraid to form temporary alliances with rival tribes if it meant defeating a common enemy. His flexibility in politics and his ability to read the shifting dynamics of tribal power played a pivotal role in his success. His alliances were often forged with enemies and then discarded once their usefulness had been exhausted. However, loyalty always remained the core principle once someone was brought into his inner circle. They were treated with respect, and betrayal was not tolerated. Temujin's commitment to meritocracy also set him apart from many of his rivals. Unlike other Khans, who relied solely on family ties to maintain power, Temujin promoted people based on their ability and loyalty regardless of their background. He rewarded his most loyal and capable followers with positions of power, including generals, governors, and administrators. This system allowed him to build a well-disciplined, loyal, and capable force that would be crucial in his rise to power and in the consolidation of his empire. The Mongol world in Temujin's time was one of constant warfare, shifting alliances, and treachery. To secure his position and rise above his rivals, Temujin had to demonstrate not just strength, but also incredible military strategy. His ability to outmaneuver and defeat his rivals became legendary. And it was through a series of key battles and campaigns that he solidified his power. One of Temujin's first significant victories came in the Battle of Dahlan Balshut in 1187, where he defeated a rival tribe that had sought to undermine his authority. This battle marked the beginning of Temujin's rise as a formidable military leader. He was able to decisively crush the forces of the Taichi-Ud tribe using his knowledge of terrain and surprise attacks to outsmart his enemies. This victory proved to the Mongol tribes that Temujin was not just a survivor, but a skilled commander who could win battles against overwhelming odds. However, it was the defeat of Jebe and Berta's abduction that truly demonstrated his military genius and resolve. After Berta was kidnapped by the Merkit tribe, Temujin gathered a small army and embarked on a daring rescue mission. He managed to defeat the Merkits and free his wife, solidifying his reputation as a leader, willing to fight for those he cared about. The successful rescue not only boosted his morale, but also further cemented the loyalty of his followers. Perhaps one of the most pivotal moments in Temujin's rise came in his defeat of the rival Khan Jamuka in the Battle of the Kalk River in 1189. Jamuka had been a childhood blood brother of Temujin, but their relationship soured over differences in leadership styles. Jamuka preferred the traditional ways of Mongol leadership based on aristocracy and bloodlines, while Temujin believed in merit and loyalty. Their rivalry came to a head when Temujin's forces clashed with Jamuka's at Kalk River. Despite being outnumbered, Temujin's forces won the battle, and Jamuka's army was decisively defeated. However, Temujin did not take Jamuka's defeat lightly. Instead of executing him, as was customary in the Mongol world, Temujin chose to show mercy to his rival. This act of mercy not only displayed his wisdom, but also helped solidify his reputation as a leader who valued loyalty and unity over vengeance. Jamuka's eventual betrayal and alliance with other enemies only reinforced the idea that Temujin's vision of leadership was stronger than the traditional blood-based systems of power. Temujin's ability to win key battles, form alliances, and maintain loyalty in the face of constant challenges was the foundation of his power. His early victories laid the groundwork for his eventual unification of the Mongol tribes. But they also revealed his unique approach to leadership, one that combined military skill, political savvy, and deep personal loyalty. Temujin's rise to power was a journey marked by struggle, military brilliance, and an unshakable commitment to his people. Through his ability to form alliances, his unique approach to loyalty, and his tactical genius, he was able to rise above his rivals and unite the fractured Mongol tribes. In the next section, we will explore how these early successes paved the way for the creation of the Mongol Empire, and how Temujin began to shape the future of the world. The Mongol army under Genghis Khan became one of the most formidable fighting forces in history, not only in terms of size and strength, but in terms of its highly effective organization, discipline, and strategic innovations. One of the key components of the Mongol military was its organization. The Mongol army was structured to be flexible, adaptable, and capable of operating in a wide variety of environments. At the heart of this structure was the Tumen system, which divided the army into units that were scalable for different situations, from small skirmishes to large-scale battles. A Tumen was a military unit consisting of 10,000 soldiers, the core component of the Mongol army. Each Tumen was subdivided into Jaghun, 1,000 soldiers, Mingan, 100 soldiers, and Zun, 10 soldiers. This structure was efficient, allowing for both independent action and coordinated large-scale operations. The system of dividing units based on multiples of 10 allowed for rapid communication and clear hierarchical command, which was essential in such a vast empire. Every man in the Mongol army was trained for flexibility, and this was crucial to the army's ability to adapt and overcome a wide range of challenges. Unlike traditional armies, where soldiers were often specialized archers, infantry cavalry, the Mongol soldier was expected to be versatile. Mongol warriors were known for their ability to fight in a wide variety of situations, whether on horseback, in hand-to-hand combat, or using advanced weaponry like bows and swords. The cavalry was the backbone of the Mongol army. Horseback riding was ingrained in Mongol culture from an early age, and the Mongols excelled in mounted combat. The Mongol cavalry was highly disciplined, able to perform complex maneuvers with speed and precision. It was in cavalry that the Mongols truly revolutionized warfare. They employed both light cavalry, who used speed and agility to harass and harry the enemy, and heavy cavalry, who provided the powerful armored force that could deliver decisive blows. This combination of light and heavy cavalry gave the Mongols a well-rounded force that could strike fast and hard, making it almost impossible for their enemies to predict their tactics. The Mongols also emphasized a unit-based structure that focused on loyalty and group cohesion. Each soldier was part of a unit that was bound by both kinship and loyalty. This bond was critical because the Mongols valued unity above all else. If a unit of 10 men or 100 men fought bravely, the entire unit could rise to higher ranks and gain more power. This focus on loyalty and brotherhood helped to create a cohesive, well-organized force that worked like a well-oiled machine on the battlefield. An essential aspect of the Mongol military was their ability to operate in the field for long periods. Soldiers had minimal supply lines, allowing them to live off the land, take advantage of local resources, and strike when and where they were least expected. The Mongol cavalry was self-sustaining, and soldiers carried their own supplies, most notably their bows, arrows, and rations, ensuring that they could stay in the field for weeks or even months at a time. This ability to live off the land and remain mobile gave the Mongols a logistical advantage that other armies could not match. Genghis Khan's military genius was not confined to the structure of the Mongol army. He was also a master of innovative tactics that revolutionized warfare. One of his most significant contributions was his use of psychological warfare. Genghis Khan understood the power of fear and the impact it had on both soldiers and civilians. He used this to his advantage to disrupt and demoralize his enemies before a battle even began. One of the most notable psychological tactics used by Genghis Khan was the feigned retreat, a trick that the Mongols perfected. In this maneuver, the Mongols would pretend to retreat in the face of an enemy attack, only to turn around and ambush the pursuing forces. This tactic would create confusion and cause panic among the enemy ranks, often leading them to break formation and fall into disarray. The Mongols would then strike decisively, using their speed and surprise to deliver a crushing blow. Another psychological weapon in the Mongol arsenal was their reputation for brutality. Genghis Khan and his army cultivated a reputation for devastating destruction wherever they went. Cities that resisted the Mongol advance were often destroyed, and their populations massacred. This reputation for extreme violence struck fear into the hearts of Genghis Khan's enemies, often causing entire cities or regions to surrender without a fight. The Mongols used terror as a force multiplier, undermining enemy morale and causing them to collapse under the weight of fear. Speed and mobility were also central to Mongol tactics. The Mongols could travel vast distances at incredible speeds, allowing them to attack with little warning. Their ability to move quickly was not only due to the exceptional quality of their cavalry, but also the way in which they utilized their army's structure. The Mongols would often launch quick raids, harassing enemy forces and withdrawing before they could mount a meaningful response. By constantly shifting the battlefield in their favor, the Mongols maintained the initiative and dictated the tempo of the conflict. The Mongols also made use of combined arms tactics. They integrated archers' cavalry and even siege weapons to create a force that could handle any situation. For example, they would use light cavalry to harass the enemy and force them into position only to have heavy cavalry ready to deliver a crushing charge at the opportune moment. This multi-pronged approach allowed the Mongols to adapt to any battlefield situation, whether it was open plains or a fortified city. Genghis Khan also recognized the importance of intelligence gathering. Before a battle, Mongol scouts would infiltrate enemy territory, gathering information about the terrain, the enemy's movements, and weaknesses. This information would then be used to inform battle plans, allowing the Mongols to strike where they were most likely to succeed. The Mongols were masters of deception and would often spread misinformation to mislead their enemies. These tactics ensured that they were always a step ahead of their foes. Although the Mongols are often associated with fast-moving cavalry raids and open-field battles, they were also highly skilled in siege warfare, a domain in which many nomadic armies had traditionally been weak. Under Genghis Khan, the Mongols revolutionized siege tactics, using a combination of innovation engineering and psychological warfare to overcome even the most formidable fortifications. Genghis Khan's military leadership extended to technology and engineering, and he made use of siege weapons to break through the fortified cities of his enemies. The Mongols incorporated catapults, siege towers, and battering rams into their arsenal. They also used gunpowder in the form of bombs and fire arrows to devastating effect. In fact, Genghis Khan's conquests helped spread the knowledge of gunpowder technology across Asia and into Europe. One of the key elements of Mongol siege warfare was the use of psychological tactics. The Mongols were known to be patient during sieges, often surrounding a city and waiting for it to run out of food or resources. But it was the terror they inflicted upon the inhabitants of these cities that truly crippled their enemies' will to resist. Genghis Khan was notorious for offering a simple choice: surrender or face complete destruction. If a city resisted, it would be destroyed, sometimes to the point of total annihilation. This brutal approach, combined with the Mongols' ability to build siege weapons, quickly gave them a powerful advantage in prolonged conflicts. One of the most famous examples of Mongol siege warfare occurred during the siege of Zhengdu, modern-day Beijing, in 1215. The city was heavily fortified, but the Mongols used a combination of siege engines and psychological tactics to force the city's surrender. Genghis Khan's army surrounded the city, cutting off all supply routes, and used siege weapons to batter down the walls. After several months of bombardment, the city finally fell, and its inhabitants faced the consequences of resisting the Mongol advance. The Mongols' expertise in siege warfare allowed them to conquer cities that had long been considered impenetrable. They would often take cities in a matter of weeks, something that would have been unthinkable for most other armies of the time. Their ability to adapt and innovate in the realm of siege warfare ensured that no fortress could stand in their way for long. The Mongol army under Genghis Khan was a revolutionary force, blending innovation speed and deadly precision. From their efficient military organization built around the Tumen system to their mastery of psychological warfare and siege tactics, the Mongols transformed the way battles were fought. Their cavalry-based tactics and combined arms strategies gave them the flexibility to conquer vast territories, while their use of terror and innovation in siege warfare broke down even the strongest of defenses. The Mongols under Genghis Khan proved that military success is not just about numbers, but about adaptability, intelligence, and the ability to strike decisively and with precision. In the next section, we will look at the Mongol conquests and how these military innovations helped Genghis Khan create the largest empire the world had ever seen. The Mongol Empire under Genghis Khan began its expansion in the early 1200s with a series of daring and brutal campaigns that would reshape the political landscape of Asia. One of the earliest and most significant campaigns was the Mongol invasions of the Western Xia and Jin dynasties, two powerful empires in northern China. These campaigns were pivotal in establishing Genghis Khan's military supremacy and showcasing the innovative strategies and ruthless tactics that would become his trademark. By the time Genghis Khan launched these invasions, the Mongol tribes had already been unified under his leadership, and his army was well organized, battle-hardened, and ready for larger-scale conquest. The Western Xia and Jin dynasties were ideal targets for Mongol expansion. The Western Xia, ruled by the Tangut people, controlled much of the region to the west of the Jin dynasty, while the Jin dynasty established by the Jurchen people controlled northern China. Both empires were wealthy, politically stable, and militarily powerful, but they were also vulnerable to the Mongols' superior tactics and their ability to adapt to any battlefield situation. The Mongol conquest of the Western Xia, also known as the Xia Kingdom, began in 1205 when Genghis Khan's forces launched a series of raids against the Tangut Kingdom, located in what is now northern China, Mongolia, and parts of modern-day Tibet. The Western Xia were known for their fortified cities, well-organized military forces, and skilled use of cavalry, making them formidable adversaries. However, the Mongols' superior tactics and discipline soon began to undermine the Xia forces. The initial stages of the campaign focused on incursions and hit-and-run raids designed to weaken the enemy's morale and disrupt their economy. The Mongols used their signature mobility to outmaneuver the Western Xia forces, exploiting their lack of speed and adaptability. This strategy of striking fast and retreating before a counterattack was a hallmark of Mongol warfare. The Mongols also targeted supply lines, cutting off food and reinforcements, further weakening the Xia defense. Genghis Khan, understanding the importance of psychological warfare, knew that terror would be a powerful tool. He spread rumors of his forces' brutality and hinted at the annihilation of cities that resisted. After several years of intense warfare, Genghis Khan achieved a major victory in 1209 by defeating the Western Xia army in the Battle of Yinchuan. This was a significant turning point in the campaign as the Mongols decisively shattered the Tangut defenses. The Mongols had used their famed feigned retreat tactic to lure the Western Xia army into a trap. Once the Tangut forces pursued the retreating Mongols, they were ambushed and destroyed in a brutal counterattack. Following this defeat, Genghis Khan moved rapidly, employing his army's mobility to surround key Western Xia cities. The Mongols, who were adept at siege warfare, began laying siege to the Xia's fortified cities, employing a mix of psychological tactics and military innovation. The use of catapults and other siege engines made it possible to breach the walls of cities previously considered impregnable. Eventually, the Western Xia Emperor, Liang Shi, realizing the overwhelming force of the Mongols, surrendered in 1210, leading to the submission of the Western Xia Empire. The Mongols established a peace treaty with the Tangut Kingdom, but this peace would prove short-lived. Despite the surrender, the Western Xia would continue to harbor rebellious elements, leading to Genghis Khan's retribution in the years that followed. In 1211, after their betrayal, Genghis Khan returned to the Western Xia, ultimately destroying the kingdom. He devastated the capital, Yinchuan, killing a large portion of the population and razing the city to the ground, ensuring that no future challenge would come from the Tangut. The Jin dynasty ruling over much of northern China was next in Genghis Khan's sights. This dynasty, established by the Jurchen people in 1115, controlled vast territories that extended from the northern steppes down to the heart of modern-day China. The Jin Empire had long been a powerful force in the region, and its cities, such as Zhongdu, modern-day Beijing, were considered among the most fortified and sophisticated in Asia. However, the Jin dynasty had several weaknesses that Genghis Khan would exploit during his campaign. The Jin Empire's relations with the Mongols were initially cordial, as both empires had common enemies. However, by 1211, Genghis Khan saw the Jin as a major obstacle to his ambitions of uniting all of China under Mongol rule. In the winter of 1211, Genghis Khan began his campaign against the Jin by launching a series of attacks on their frontier regions. The Mongols quickly captured several key towns and cities, forcing the Jin to respond. In 1213, Genghis Khan's forces laid siege to the Jin capital of Zhongdu. The Mongols used their expertise in siege warfare to surround the city, cutting off all supply routes and bombarding the walls with siege engines. The Jin defenders, who had expected the Mongols to be unable to breach their city walls, were taken by surprise. The Mongols, employing tactics of psychological warfare, intimidated the defenders by making loud, coordinated noise at night and spreading false rumors of further Mongol forces surrounding the city. The Jin eventually offered peace, but Genghis Khan refused, knowing that surrender would not guarantee future loyalty. He believed in total domination rather than treaties with enemies. After months of besieging the city, Genghis Khan eventually forced the Jin to surrender. His forces entered Zhongdu in 1215, marking a major milestone in his campaign. The Mongols employed a brutal strategy against the city's inhabitants, massacring thousands and burning much of the city. Zhongdu's fall was symbolic, demonstrating that even the most heavily fortified cities in China were vulnerable to the Mongol war machine. After the fall of Zhongdu, Genghis Khan turned his attention to the rest of the Jin Empire. The Jin dynasty's power began to crumble as the Mongols advanced across their territory, defeating their forces in several key battles. Despite initial resistance, the Mongols' military prowess and siege tactics ensured the fall of the Jin. Over the next few years, the Mongols captured the remaining Jin cities, eventually toppling the Jin dynasty entirely by 1234, several years after Genghis Khan's death. The fall of the Jin marked the complete collapse of a major dynasty and opened the way for Mongol domination over northern China. The Mongol campaigns against the Western Xia and Jin dynasties were characterized by both brutality and military innovation. These tactics were not just limited to traditional warfare. They included a mix of psychological warfare, intelligence gathering, and innovative battlefield strategies that set the Mongols apart from other empires of the time. Psychological warfare. As mentioned earlier, Genghis Khan understood the importance of psychological warfare. He often used fear and terror as a weapon, spreading rumors of his army's brutal tactics and threatening complete annihilation for those who resisted. This reputation alone often led to surrenders without a fight. The Mongols also used deception to great effect. Feigned retreats, ambushes, and even the use of fake armies were common tactics to confuse and demoralize the enemy. Speed and mobility. One of the most important aspects of Mongol military success was the speed and mobility of their cavalry. The Mongols could move incredibly fast across the open steppes, enabling them to strike at their enemies unexpectedly and retreat just as quickly if needed. This mobility made it difficult for enemy forces to track and defeat Mongol units. Siege, warfare, and engineering. The Mongols' ability to adapt to siege warfare was a crucial factor in their success. Genghis Khan's forces employed advanced siege engines, including catapults and trebuchets, to breach city walls. They also used gunpowder for creating explosive devices. The Mongols were also skilled at laying prolonged sieges to starve out their enemies, further weakening their resolve. Total annihilation. When cities refused to surrender or resisted fiercely, Genghis Khan resorted to total destruction. His forces would destroy entire cities, massacre their populations, and leave nothing behind but rubble. This would send a strong message to other cities or empires considering resistance. Use of spies and intelligence. The Mongols made use of a vast network of spies and scouts who provided them with detailed intelligence about enemy movements, terrain, and weaknesses. This allowed Genghis Khan to make well-informed decisions about where and when to strike. The Mongol conquests of the Western Xia and Jin dynasties were pivotal in establishing Genghis Khan as one of the greatest military commanders in history. Through his innovative tactics, ruthless strategies, and mastery of psychological warfare, Genghis Khan crushed two powerful empires and expanded his reach over vast territories. These campaigns not only showcased the Mongol army's efficiency and discipline, but also marked the beginning of a series of invasions that would eventually bring all of China under Mongol control. In the next section, we will explore how Genghis Khan's empire continued to expand across Central Asia and into the Middle East. The Khwarezm Empire, located in present-day Iran, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and Kazakhstan, was one of the most prosperous and powerful states in the Islamic world during the early 13th century. Governed by the Shah Ala ad-Din Muhammad, the Khwarezm Empire was a growing commercial and cultural center, serving as a vital link between the East and the West. However, the empire's ambitious expansion plans would lead to one of the most catastrophic military conflicts in history, the war between the Khwarezm Empire and the Mongols, which was initiated by Genghis Khan in 1219. The roots of the conflict between the Mongols and the Khwarezm Empire were primarily political and diplomatic. Genghis Khan, seeking to expand his empire's territory, initially aimed to establish friendly relations with the Khwarezm Empire, especially since the region was an important hub for trade and cultural exchange. Around 1218, Genghis Khan sent a trade caravan to the city of Otrar, a border town of the Khwarezm Empire, to establish economic ties. However, upon entering the city, the caravan was seized by local officials, and its members were killed. The Shah's representatives claimed that the caravan had been suspected of spying, but Genghis Khan, who valued trade as a means of connecting his vast empire, saw this as a grave insult and an act of bad faith. Seeking a peaceful resolution, Genghis Khan sent 3 emissaries to the Shah, offering an explanation and requesting the release of the caravan's goods and the punishment of those responsible. The Shah, however, responded by having one of the emissaries executed and sending the other 2 back mutilated with their ears and noses cut off. For Genghis Khan, this was a grave violation of diplomatic norms, and it enraged him. To the Mongols, killing or dishonoring envoys was considered one of the most heinous offenses, as it undermined the sacred bond of trust between leaders and their subjects. Genghis Khan, known for his strict adherence to the law of retaliation, lex talionis, now saw the Khwarezm Empire not only as a political threat, but as an insult to his honor and the Mongol nation. In retaliation, he prepared for war, promising to completely destroy the Khwarezm Empire for the dishonor it had inflicted. His decision to launch an all-out campaign against the Khwarezm Empire was driven not just by the desire for territorial expansion, but by a deep thirst for vengeance. The war with the Khwarezm Empire would become one of Genghis Khan's most destructive military campaigns. By the time it concluded, the once great Khwarezm Empire would lie in ruins, and Genghis Khan's reputation as a ruthless conqueror would be solidified. The campaign is also a key moment in understanding how vengeance and honor shaped Genghis Khan's leadership. His actions during the Khwarezm campaign would have lasting effects on his enemies and those who lived in his empire. Genghis Khan's decision to wage total war on Khwarezm marked a shift from traditional Mongol conquest tactics. While previous Mongol campaigns involved military expeditions to expand borders, this campaign was driven by a personal vendetta. The brutality of the Mongols' actions during the campaign, mass executions, the destruction of cities, and the wiping out of entire populations were meant to not only punish the Khwarezm Empire for its insult, but to send a chilling message to all other rulers: resistance against the Mongols would not be tolerated. The impact of this campaign was profound, and it demonstrated the consequences of defying the Mongol Empire. The Khwarezmian Sultan, Ala ad-Din Muhammad, soon found himself overwhelmed by Genghis Khan's relentless assault. His empire, once thriving, was crumbling under the weight of Mongol military might, and the Shah, humiliated and defeated, ultimately fled westward, leaving his people to face the Mongol wrath. The devastation wrought upon the Khwarezm Empire shaped Genghis Khan's reputation, both among his enemies and his own people. While many of his earlier campaigns had been successful, it was the Khwarezm campaign that solidified his image as a ruthless leader, with no tolerance for disobedience or defiance. Genghis Khan's use of psychological warfare during the Khwarezm campaign is one of the key reasons for his infamous reputation. His brutality was not just physical, it was psychological, meant to terrorize and demoralize not just his direct enemies, but anyone who might oppose him. Cities that resisted Mongol advances were given the stark choice of surrendering or facing annihilation. Samarkand, one of the greatest cities of the Khwarezm Empire, became an example of Genghis Khan's unrelenting vengeance. His message to other rulers was clear: challenge the Mongols at your peril. Total destruction was the consequence of resistance, and this terror was often enough to make cities and regions surrender without a fight. The fear of Genghis Khan and his army became so widespread that even those who had never encountered the Mongols directly were terrified of the consequences of defying them. This reputation as a ruthless conqueror served Genghis Khan well. It meant that as he expanded his empire, many other rulers would surrender without a fight, preferring to accept Mongol rule than risk complete destruction. His brutal tactics were as much about inspiring fear as they were about military conquest. The destruction of the Khwarezmian heartland became a defining moment in Genghis Khan's reign. Cities that had once flourished under the Khwarezmian sultans were wiped off the map. Samarkand, Bukhara, and Nishapur, all major cultural, commercial, and intellectual centers, fell to the Mongols. These cities, known for their grandeur and wealth, became symbols of Genghis Khan's merciless vengeance. The fall of Samarkand in 1220 is particularly significant. The city, once the jewel of Central Asia, was completely devastated. Genghis Khan's forces besieged the city, and after it fell, they engaged in a brutal slaughter of the inhabitants. It is said that the streets of Samarkand were filled with blood as Mongol forces killed thousands of civilians, soldiers, and anyone who resisted. The symbolic destruction of Samarkand sent shockwaves through the Islamic world and beyond, showing that Genghis Khan's wrath knew no bounds. The destruction of cities like Samarkand and Bukhara became a hallmark of Genghis Khan's campaigns, and these cities hold deep symbolic significance in understanding the scale of Mongol conquest. Samarkand, known as the Pearl of the East, was one of the wealthiest and most important cities of the Khwarezmian Empire. Its strategic location along the Silk Road made it a hub for trade and culture. It was also a center for Islamic learning and a place where poets, scholars, and artists gathered. Samarkand was viewed as an intellectual and artistic paradise, a beacon of Islamic civilization in Central Asia. However, when Samarkand resisted Mongol rule, it faced utter destruction. Genghis Khan laid siege to the city using his signature military tactics, including siege engines and clever feigned retreats. The Mongol forces finally breached the city's walls in 1220. Once inside, they systematically destroyed everything of value: homes, mosques, markets, and schools. Thousands of residents were slaughtered, and the city's infrastructure was completely demolished. The once thriving city was reduced to rubble, and it would never regain its former glory. Samarkand's fall served not only as a military victory for Genghis Khan, but as a powerful warning to other cities and empires. No matter how advanced or powerful a city was, it was vulnerable to the Mongol onslaught if it dared to resist. Similarly, Bukhara, another major cultural and religious center of the Khwarezm Empire, faced the wrath of Genghis Khan in 1220. After initial resistance, the city was captured by the Mongols. Like Samarkand, Bukhara was a city known for its Islamic scholarship and stunning architectural beauty. The city's mosques, madrasas, and bazaars had long been considered among the finest in the region. Genghis Khan's forces laid siege to Bukhara, and when the city was finally captured, the Mongols engaged in brutal retaliation. The entire population was either killed or enslaved, and the city's buildings were destroyed. In Bukhara's case, the fall of the city was not just a military triumph, but an example of Mongol justice, a reminder that defiance would lead to complete annihilation. The destruction of cities like Samarkand and Bukhara had profound consequences. Beyond the physical devastation, the cultural and economic impact was far-reaching. These cities were intellectual and commercial hubs, and their loss dealt a severe blow to Islamic civilization in the region. The fall of Samarkand and Bukhara marked the end of an era and sent ripples of fear across Central Asia, Persia, and even the wider Islamic world. The destruction also had psychological implications for the people of the Khwarezm Empire. Genghis Khan's forces didn't just conquer, they destroyed everything in their path. The message was clear: anyone who opposed the Mongols would face complete annihilation. This terror was a key part of Genghis Khan's strategy, ensuring that his empire would continue to expand uncontested. By the early 1220s, after devastating the Khwarezm Empire, Genghis Khan turned his attention westward, expanding the Mongol Empire into Persia, modern-day Iran, and the Caucasus. These regions presented both strategic and economic value to the Mongols, as they provided access to rich resources, lucrative trade routes, and a gateway into further conquests in the Middle East and Eastern Europe. The Mongol campaigns in Persia and the Caucasus were pivotal moments in the empire's expansion and marked the continuation of Genghis Khan's vision to dominate the known world. Genghis Khan's invasion of Persia began in 1218 as a response to the conflict with the Khwarezm Empire. The Khwarezmian Sultan Ala ad-Din Muhammad had been defeated, but his remnants continued to resist Mongol authority. Persia, under the control of various local rulers, was a fertile and prosperous land, with key cities like Isfahan, Tabriz, and Shiraz playing important roles in regional trade and governance. In 1220, after finishing his campaign against the Khwarezm Empire, Genghis Khan turned his forces to consolidate Mongol control over Persia. The Mongols had already established their dominance over much of Central Asia, and Persia was the logical next step. Genghis Khan's campaign in Persia was marked by speed and devastating force, as the Mongols systematically crushed the regional powers and took control of major cities. One of the most significant battles of this campaign was the siege of the city of Nishapur in 1221. The city, a major cultural and commercial center, resisted Mongol forces. In retaliation, Genghis Khan's army unleashed a brutal assault, and after the city's fall, it was destroyed. This massacre of civilians and soldiers alike was a warning to other cities in Persia that defied the Mongols. The brutal tactics used in Nishapur became emblematic of Genghis Khan's strategy: rapid conquest, followed by complete annihilation of any resistance. The capture of Isfahan in 1221 was another key moment in the Mongol conquest of Persia. Isfahan, one of the most beautiful and prosperous cities of the Persian Empire, had not only resisted Mongol forces, but had killed a Mongol trade caravan. In retaliation, Genghis Khan's army laid siege to the city. The defenders of Isfahan, although skilled in battle, were overwhelmed by the Mongol siege weapons and tactics. Once the city was taken, Genghis Khan ordered a horrific massacre where it is believed that around 1.5 million people were killed. By the time Genghis Khan's campaign in Persia ended, much of the region had been reduced to ruins. The destruction was so thorough that it sent shockwaves throughout the Middle East. Genghis Khan's ruthless tactics in Persia served as a clear message to other powers in the region that resistance to Mongol domination would result in complete devastation. As the Mongols pushed westward into Persia, they also launched campaigns into the Caucasus region, which lies between the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea. This region, which includes modern-day Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan, was strategically important for the Mongols because it provided access to the fertile plains and trade routes of Europe. The Caucasus was also a region rich in natural resources, and controlling it would ensure the Mongols could project power further into the Middle East and beyond. The Mongols, led by Subutai and Jibei, two of Genghis Khan's most trusted generals, conducted a series of raids and invasions into the Caucasus from 1220 to 1223. These campaigns were part of a broader strategy to weaken regional powers and prepare for further expansion into Europe. The Battle of the Khalkha River, fought in 1223, was a pivotal moment in the Mongol expansion into the Caucasus. In this battle, a combined force of Kievan Rus princes and Cuman warriors attempted to resist the Mongols' advance into the region. Despite the numerical advantage of the Russian and Cuman forces, the Mongols decisively defeated them, using their signature tactics of speed and feigned retreat. The Mongol victory at Khalkha sent a clear message to Eastern Europe: the Mongols were coming, and they could not be stopped. The defeat of the Rus forces opened the way for the Mongols to continue their march westward into Europe. The successful Mongol campaigns in both Persia and the Caucasus had a far-reaching impact on the Middle East and Central Asia. The destruction wrought by Genghis Khan's forces left lasting scars on the region. Cities that had once been thriving cultural and economic hubs were reduced to ruins, and populations were decimated. The swift and brutal nature of the Mongol invasions, coupled with their innovative siege tactics and use of psychological warfare, created a level of fear that spread far beyond Persia and the Caucasus. Genghis Khan's conquest also paved the way for the expansion of the Ilkhanate, a Mongol state established in Persia after his death. The Ilkhanate would become a significant Mongol-controlled region that influenced the political and cultural landscape of the Middle East for centuries. By the early 1220s, as Genghis Khan's empire stretched from China to Persia, his conquests were starting to attract the attention of Europe. Though Genghis Khan had not yet invaded Europe directly, his victories in Persia, the Caucasus, and Central Asia were seen as the preliminary steps of an expansion that could soon sweep across Eastern Europe. The Mongol presence in the Caucasus and their victories over the Kievan Rus princes in 1223 were particularly alarming to European rulers. The Rus principalities, which were located just north of the Black Sea, had long been in contact with the Byzantine Empire and the kingdoms of Eastern Europe. The destruction of the Rus army by the Mongols in 1223 showed that the Mongols had the potential to invade and dominate the entire region. The Mongol campaigns in Persia, the Caucasus, and Eastern Europe were pivotal in the expansion of Genghis Khan's empire. His conquest of Persia and the Caucasus shattered regional powers, and his campaigns into Eastern Europe raised the specter of Mongol domination across the continent. Though the Mongols did not immediately conquer Europe, their military successes, innovations, and psychological warfare left a lasting legacy. The Mongol threat would continue to influence European politics for decades, even after Genghis Khan's death. In the next section, we will explore the lasting impact of the Mongol Empire on Europe-Asia and the legacy Genghis Khan left behind. One of the most remarkable aspects of Genghis Khan's rule was the legal system that he established known as the Yasa. The Yasa was not a written law code in the modern sense. Rather, it was a collection of decrees, traditions, and principles that governed every aspect of Mongol life. It was the glue that held the Mongol Empire together and helped Genghis Khan maintain control over his vast, diverse, and multi-ethnic empire. The Yasa was a set of laws and regulations designed to ensure order, discipline, and loyalty throughout the empire. While many aspects of the Yasa remain shrouded in mystery, historians generally agree that it was based on a combination of traditional Mongol customs and Genghis Khan's personal decrees. The Yasa was enforced by the Mongol military and was binding on all members of Mongol society, including the royal family, military leaders, and common people. One of the most important aspects of the Yasa was its emphasis on loyalty and obedience. Genghis Khan recognized that to rule such a vast empire, loyalty among his subjects was paramount. The Yasa codified the concept of absolute obedience to the Khan. It was designed to prevent the betrayal and infighting that had plagued Mongol tribes before his rise. In the Yasa, there were strict punishments for those who disobeyed the Khan's orders or betrayed their fellow Mongols. Key components of the Yasa included military discipline. The Yasa imposed strict discipline on the Mongol military. Soldiers were required to be loyal, obedient, and disciplined in all aspects of their military service. They were forbidden from looting, pillaging, or acting without orders from their commanders. Religious freedom. Although Genghis Khan himself was a follower of shamanism, he believed in the importance of religious tolerance. The Yasa decreed that people of all faiths were free to practice their religion without interference. This policy helped maintain peace among the various ethnic and religious groups in his empire. Family and social order. The Yasa also included rules regarding marriage, family, and social conduct. For example, adultery was considered a severe offense, and the punishment for it was death. Additionally, it was illegal to kidnap women or steal from others, and those found guilty of such acts faced harsh punishments. Protection of trade and commerce. Genghis Khan understood the importance of trade for the economic prosperity of the empire. The Yasa provided protections for merchants and traders, ensuring that trade routes remained safe and that goods could be transported without fear of theft or disruption. Punishments for disobedience. The Yasa was notorious for its harsh punishments, which were meant to instill fear and ensure strict adherence to the law. Desertion, betrayal, and disrespect to the Khan were punishable by death or mutilation. For lesser offenses, punishments ranged from flogging to confiscation of property. The Yasa was enforced by a network of military officers and officials who acted as both police and judges in the Mongol Empire. These officials had the power to arrest, try, and execute anyone who violated the laws. The military played a central role in this process, as soldiers were required to uphold the laws of the Yasa, even when it came to internal matters within Mongol society. One of the ways Genghis Khan ensured that the Yasa was enforced was through constant communication and a series of messengers who relayed orders from the Khan to the farthest reaches of his empire. This allowed him to maintain a level of control over his vast territory, even as it expanded into new regions. While the Yasa itself was not a written code, Genghis Khan's reliance on it and the importance of loyalty, discipline, and justice within his empire cannot be overstated. The Yasa helped unify the Mongol Empire, creating a legal framework that applied to every member of society regardless of their ethnicity, status, or religion. It provided a sense of order and fairness that was crucial for governing such a diverse and expansive empire. Along with the Yasa, Genghis Khan introduced several administrative reforms that helped structure his empire for long-term stability and control. These reforms ranged from military organization to taxation, law enforcement, and trade regulation. Genghis Khan's goal was to create an empire that could function efficiently across vast distances with diverse populations and regions that each had their own traditions and needs. Genghis Khan's military reforms were designed to create an efficient and effective fighting force, but they also played a crucial role in the administration of his empire. Genghis Khan divided his army into units of 10,000 men, called a tumen, and further subdivided them into units of 1,110 soldiers. This highly structured military system made it easier to communicate orders, maintain discipline, and carry out swift military operations. The loyalty of these units was paramount. Each commander was responsible for the well-being and loyalty of their subordinates, ensuring that the Mongol military remained united and powerful. However, the military system also played a vital role in maintaining order in the civilian sphere. Genghis Khan used his military officers as local governors, giving them the responsibility to oversee the daily administration of cities and territories that had been conquered. These military leaders were charged with ensuring that the Yasa was enforced and that the local populations were compliant with the laws of the Mongol Empire. Another important reform implemented by Genghis Khan was the introduction of a taxation system that enabled the Mongol Empire to support its massive military campaigns and infrastructure projects. The Mongol taxation system was relatively simple and efficient, designed to extract resources from conquered territories without stifling economic activity. The Mongols imposed a poll tax on all subjects, with each household required to pay a fixed amount. Additionally, land taxes were levied, which depended on the agricultural output of a region. The Mongols also taxed trade and commerce, making sure that key routes, such as those along the Silk Road, were taxed regularly. However, trade was encouraged, and Genghis Khan took measures to ensure that merchants could operate without fear of theft or disruption. One of the most innovative aspects of the Mongol taxation system was the incentive to local rulers and merchants to cooperate with the Mongols. Genghis Khan's empire was vast, and it was difficult for him to govern directly all parts of the empire. As such, he established a system of regional autonomy where local leaders were allowed to maintain control over their territories as long as they paid their taxes and followed the Yasa. This system not only ensured a steady flow of revenue, but also helped integrate conquered peoples into the Mongol system by providing them with some degree of local control. Genghis Khan's emphasis on justice was another aspect of his administrative reforms. He established a system of courts and legal procedures that were meant to uphold the laws of the Yasa. These courts were often presided over by military officers or trusted advisors who had the authority to impose sentences based on the laws of the empire. While the Yasa was a strict and often harsh legal system, it was also designed to maintain fairness. One of the guiding principles of Mongol law was the idea of equity, that all people, regardless of their status or background, should be treated equally under the law. This idea of justice helped Genghis Khan gain the loyalty of many of his subjects, particularly those who had been previously oppressed by corrupt or ineffective rulers. Moreover, the Mongol legal system was characterized by its swift and efficient enforcement. Punishments were severe, but they were designed to maintain order, not to inflict arbitrary cruelty. The swift resolution of disputes was key to ensuring that the empire remained stable and that Genghis Khan's vision for a unified empire was realized. Genghis Khan's reforms also extended to the regulation of trade and economic infrastructure. As his empire expanded, it became clear that trade routes, particularly the Silk Road, were vital to the prosperity of the Mongol Empire. Genghis Khan sought to protect trade not only as a source of revenue, but also as a means of cultural exchange between the East and West. The Mongols implemented several trade policies to ensure that merchants could travel safely across the empire. Trade routes were protected by military patrols, and merchants were offered guarantees of safety, which helped foster economic activity. The Mongol Empire became a hub of commerce, facilitating the movement of goods such as silk spices, precious metals, and ideas across the continents. One of the key innovations in Mongol trade policy was the Pax Mongolica, or Mongol peace. This was a period during which the Mongols provided a relatively stable and secure environment for trade, which encouraged merchants and travelers to move freely across the empire without fear of robbers or local warlords. This helped create a vast interconnected global trading network, and under Mongol rule, the Silk Road flourished. One of the most significant yet often overlooked aspects of Genghis Khan's reign was his impact on global trade and economic exchange. Through his military conquests and political acumen, he played a critical role in reviving the Silk Road, the ancient trade network that connected the East and the West. By uniting a vast empire stretching from China to Eastern Europe, Genghis Khan created an environment that encouraged trade, commerce, and cultural exchange like never before. His policies facilitated the movement of goods, people, and ideas across Eurasia, making the Mongol Empire a global bridge between civilizations. The Silk Road had been in existence for centuries before Genghis Khan's time acting as a network of trade routes that connected China with Central Asia, the Middle East, and Europe. However, by the time Genghis Khan ascended to power, the Silk Road was not as secure or functional as it had been in its heyday. Several factors, such as regional conflicts, the fragmentation of the Chinese Empire, and the weakening of other great powers in Central Asia, had disrupted the flow of trade along these routes. Genghis Khan understood the critical importance of trade for the economic prosperity of his empire. As a nomadic leader, he valued mobility and efficiency, and he saw that a connected world would bring wealth and stability to the Mongol Empire. His ability to unite vast swaths of land under a single authority was a key factor in the revival of the Silk Road. Once the Mongol Empire expanded across Central Asia, China, and into Eastern Europe, trade routes were protected, and security for merchants was guaranteed. The Mongols created a vast network of roads and infrastructure that made it easier for merchants to travel. The Mongols' military presence along these routes ensured that they were largely safe from banditry and local warlords who had often disrupted trade in the past. This is a stark contrast to earlier periods when merchants faced constant dangers while traveling. In addition to physical protection, Genghis Khan implemented policies that facilitated trade. For example, he introduced the use of standardized currency and taxation systems across the empire. These policies helped ensure that trade could operate smoothly across various regions from the markets of Beijing to those of Baghdad. Merchants, regardless of their ethnicity or nationality, could travel across vast territories with the assurance that their goods and resources would be respected, and they would be given safe passage. Under Genghis Khan's reign, goods such as silk, tea spices, wool, and precious metals were traded in large quantities. Central Asia, in particular, thrived as a trade nexus connecting China with Persia, the Middle East, and even Europe. These goods traveled along the famous Silk Road, which became a conduit not only for products, but also for cultural exchange, scientific ideas, and technological innovations. The revitalization of the Silk Road under Genghis Khan's rule brought immense wealth to his empire and laid the foundation for a global trade network that continued to flourish long after his death. One example of how Genghis Khan encouraged trade was his establishment of caravanserais, or rest stations for merchants along the Silk Road. These were places where merchants could rest, replenish their supplies, and seek protection for their caravans. This infrastructure made trade safer and more reliable, encouraging merchants from all over the world to travel and trade within the Mongol Empire. The revival of the Silk Road during Genghis Khan's reign not only brought immense prosperity to the Mongols, but also integrated the economies of East and West in unprecedented ways. Europe, China, and the Islamic world were now connected through a unified trade network that facilitated the exchange of goods, cultures, and ideas. Goods such as Chinese porcelain, Persian carpets, Indian cotton, and European wine began to flow freely across Eurasia. For Europe, the Mongol Empire served as a gateway to the East, with Venetian and Genoese traders being able to transport goods from China, India, and other regions to the Western world. This flow of luxury goods inspired European exploration and laid the groundwork for the age of exploration in the 15th century, as European powers began seeking direct routes to the East. The cultural exchange between these regions was profound. As goods flowed along the trade routes, so too did art, technology, and scientific knowledge. For instance, gunpowder and paper-making technology from China spread to the Islamic world and eventually to Europe, changing warfare and communication forever. This exchange of knowledge was one of the lasting legacies of Genghis Khan's trade policies, as it contributed to the Renaissance in Europe and the broader development of civilizations around the world. Another important aspect of Genghis Khan's governance was his commitment to religious tolerance. Unlike many of the rulers of his time, who often sought to impose their religion on their subjects, Genghis Khan embraced a pluralistic view of religion. He believed that the people of his empire should have the freedom to practice their own faiths and that all religions had value. This policy of religious tolerance had far-reaching effects on the cultural exchange that took place during the Mongol Empire, fostering an environment in which various religious and cultural traditions could coexist. While Genghis Khan himself was a shamanist believing in spirits and the natural forces of the world, he did not see his personal faith as the sole or superior religion. He was deeply influenced by Tengrism, the ancient Mongol belief in a sky god Tengri. But he also recognized that other faiths, such as Buddhism, Christianity, Islam, and even Manichaeism, were practiced by many of his subjects. Genghis Khan did not attempt to convert his people to one single religion, but instead allowed them to practice their beliefs freely. Genghis Khan's religious tolerance extended to all corners of his empire. He encouraged the practice of Buddhism in Central Asia and China, allowed Islam to flourish in Persia, and even protected Nestorian Christians and Catholic missionaries in the territories he controlled. He welcomed Muslim scholars and priests to his court and used them as advisors and administrators. This openness to different faiths helped create a sense of inclusivity within his empire, fostering an environment where intellectual and cultural exchange could thrive. One of the most significant examples of Genghis Khan's religious tolerance was his treatment of the Muslim population in Persia and Central Asia. Despite the Mongols' initial conflict with the Khwarezm Empire, Genghis Khan embraced Islam after his conquest of the region and brought many Muslim scholars into his service. He also made provisions for the construction of mosques and religious schools, giving Muslims the freedom to practice their faith and contribute to the administration of the empire. In China, Genghis Khan and his successors allowed Buddhism to flourish, even patronizing Buddhist temples and monastic orders. He also appointed Buddhist leaders as advisors and administrators, showcasing his understanding of the importance of religious institutions in maintaining societal harmony and political stability. Genghis Khan's policy of religious tolerance had profound effects on the empire. It allowed for the integration of diverse peoples and cultures, creating a multicultural society within the Mongol Empire. The policy also contributed to the stability of the empire by ensuring that no group felt oppressed or alienated. This inclusivity fostered a sense of loyalty among the various peoples of the Mongol Empire, which helped maintain peace and order within the vast territories that Genghis Khan and his successors ruled. Religious tolerance also facilitated cultural exchange across the Mongol Empire. As people of different faiths interacted and shared their knowledge, they were able to pass on scientific discoveries, medical techniques, and philosophical ideas across borders. The Islamic Golden Age, for example, contributed to the advancement of mathematics, astronomy, and medicine, all of which were shared with Mongol scholars. Likewise, Confucianism and Buddhism spread to Central Asia and Persia, influencing local customs and practices. Furthermore, the Mongol postal system, a vast network of communication and transportation, played a vital role in facilitating these exchanges. The system connected various parts of the empire, allowing not just messages, but also artifacts, books, and ideas to flow freely between East and West. The cultural and economic impact of Genghis Khan's reign was transformative. His revival of the Silk Road and the policies that facilitated trade and commerce helped create an interconnected world that brought wealth ideas and technologies from East to West. His religious tolerance allowed different cultures and faiths to coexist, fostering an environment of intellectual and cultural exchange that contributed to the growth of civilizations across Eurasia. Through his leadership, Genghis Khan not only built an empire, but also created a legacy of global interaction, one that would continue to shape the course of history long after his death. In the next section, we will examine the lasting legacy of Genghis Khan, including how his empire influenced the future of Asia, Europe, and the world. Genghis Khan's legacy was not just in the vast empire he built, but also in the leadership of his sons and their ability to carry on his work. As a conqueror, Genghis Khan knew that his empire needed strong leadership to maintain stability, especially considering the vastness of the Mongol territories. He believed deeply in the concept of meritocracy, and his successors would inherit not only his territorial conquests, but also the traditions of military excellence, administrative reforms, and the Mongol way of governance. Among his sons, Ogedei Khan would emerge as the most notable successor, continuing Genghis Khan's work and consolidating the empire after his death. Genghis Khan had several sons, but the most prominent were Jebe Chagatai, Ogedei, and Tolui. Each played an important role in the administration of the Mongol Empire and the military campaigns that followed their father's death. Genghis Khan's sons were crucial in maintaining the unity of the Mongol Empire, especially after his death in 1227. Ogedei Khan, Genghis Khan's third son, was designated as the Great Khan by his father, the supreme ruler of the entire Mongol Empire. Ogedei was seen as the most capable of Genghis Khan's sons, and his leadership would shape the future of the Mongol state. Ogedei was chosen due to his administrative acumen and his ability to manage the Mongol territories. Jebe, another son of Genghis Khan, was involved in several important military campaigns, including the campaigns in the Caucasus and Russia. Although not as prominent as Ogedei Jebe, was a trusted general who helped extend the Mongol influence into Eastern Europe. Chagatai, Genghis Khan's second son, was given control over the Central Asian region, which included parts of modern-day Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan. He was known for his stern leadership and his role in maintaining Mongol rule in the regions of the empire that required constant military vigilance. Tolui, Genghis Khan's fourth son, was the regent during the early years of Ogedei's reign. He served as the de facto ruler until Ogedei was old enough to assume the throne. Tolui also played a crucial role in continuing his father's military campaigns in the West. While these sons had varying degrees of influence, it was Ogedei who became the most important successor. Genghis Khan had recognized Ogedei's political talents and administrative skills early on, which is why he made him his heir. Under Ogedei's leadership, the Mongol Empire continued to expand, and the consolidation of Mongol rule in newly conquered territories became a priority. Ogedei Khan was instrumental in ensuring the stability of the empire after his father's death. He succeeded Genghis Khan as Great Khan in 1229 and ruled until his death in 1241. His reign represented a period of consolidation and expansion for the Mongol Empire. One of Ogedei's most significant achievements was his successful military campaigns across Eastern Europe and the Middle East. Under his leadership, Mongol armies invaded Hungary, Poland, and the Kievan Rus advancing as far as the gates of Vienna. Ogeday's armies also continued the Mongol campaign in Persia and the Caucasus, maintaining the momentum Genghis Khan had built. Ogeday also oversaw significant administrative reforms, including the expansion of the taxation system and the establishment of a more formalized bureaucratic structure within the Mongol Empire. His policies made the empire more organized, allowing for greater control and management of the vast territories that Genghis Khan had conquered. Under Ogeday's leadership, the Silk Road flourished, and trade flourished across the empire, creating a more interconnected world. Importantly, Ogeday did not simply inherit his father's empire. He continued Genghis Khan's vision of an expansive and unified Mongol state. He maintained the legal and economic systems established by Genghis Khan, including the Yasa, which ensured stability and order throughout the empire. Ogeday's leadership helped the Mongols to preserve their dominance across Asia and Eastern Europe. Despite the apparent unity established by Genghis Khan, succession within the Mongol Empire was a source of struggle and division after his death. Genghis Khan had tried to ensure that his empire would remain unified by appointing Ogeday as his successor. But the reality of Mongol politics, marked by tribal rivalries, personal ambitions, and regional power struggles, would eventually lead to succession disputes that threatened the unity of the empire. Genghis Khan's approach to succession was influenced by both his personal experience as a tribal leader and the Mongol custom of merit-based promotion. However, unlike some monarchs, Genghis Khan did not simply rely on a primogeniture system where the eldest son inherits the throne. Instead, he carefully observed his son's capabilities and designated Ogeday as his successor. For several reasons, Ogeday's ability to govern, his diplomatic and military skills, and his loyalty to Genghis Khan's vision. However, Genghis Khan's death in 1227 set off a succession crisis. His death left his empire in the hands of several competing factions: his sons, his generals, and his other relatives. Each of his sons had their own ambitions and desires for power, and their differing interests created tensions that would play out after Ogeday's ascension to the throne. While Ogeday was eventually chosen as Genghis Khan's successor, Chagatai Tolui and Jebe all harbored ambitions for greater power. This led to tensions particularly with Chagatai, who was dissatisfied with his designated territory in Central Asia. Chagatai believed that his military capabilities and strategic skills warranted a larger share of the empire, and his desire for more power created internal friction. The competition for control over Mongol territories also affected Tolui Genghis Khan's fourth son, who played a pivotal role during Ogeday's early reign. Tolui was regent after Genghis Khan's death and continued to exert significant influence over the empire's military actions. However, Tolui's premature death in 1232 left a power vacuum, and Ogeday struggled to maintain control over the empire without his brother's support. Tolui's death created divisions within the Mongol leadership, and his sons were not able to command the same loyalty or respect as their grandfather had done. The most significant succession dispute occurred after Ogeday's death in 1241. Ogeday's sudden death left the empire vulnerable to further divisions. Ogeday's son, Guyuk, was positioned to take the throne, but he faced immediate opposition from other members of the family, including Tolui's sons and other influential Mongol generals. This struggle for the throne was exacerbated by rival factions within the Mongol leadership, with each side accusing the other of corruption, weakness, or betrayal. In 1246, Genghis Khan was formally elected as the Great Khan, but his reign was short-lived. Guyuk's failure to effectively manage the empire, coupled with the ongoing divisions within the Mongol court, weakened his authority. He died in 1248, and the Mongol Empire was once again thrown into a power struggle. The succession disputes that arose after Genghis Khan's death marked the beginning of the fragmentation of the Mongol Empire. Though the empire remained largely intact during Ogedei's reign, the internal struggles weakened the Mongol leadership. The different factions vying for control created divisions that would ultimately result in the division of the empire into separate khanates: the Yuan dynasty in China, the Ilkhanate in Persia, the Golden Horde in Russia and Eastern Europe, and the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia. These divisions became more pronounced after the death of Ogedei. While Genghis Khan had established a strong foundation for the Mongol Empire, the internal feuds and competing interests of his heirs meant that the empire would eventually splinter into several regional powers. The Mongol Khanates, while still united by the Mongol legacy and shared traditions, would operate as independent entities with differing policies, leaders, and priorities. The death of Genghis Khan in 1227 marked the end of an era. After years of incredible military conquests, diplomatic initiatives, and organizational reforms, the Mongol leader passed away at the height of his power, having established the largest contiguous empire in history. However, the circumstances surrounding his death remain shrouded in mystery and speculation to this day, with historians offering different theories about the exact cause and nature of his demise. His death, coupled with the legend of his conquests, only added to the mythic status that Genghis Khan holds in history. The precise circumstances of Genghis Khan's death have long been debated. The most commonly accepted theory is that he died from injuries sustained during a campaign against the Western Xia Empire in 1227. During this campaign, Genghis Khan is said to have fallen from his horse after a battle, suffering internal injuries that led to his death. This version of events suggests that he died of wounds or a disease related to these injuries, though some sources describe him as succumbing to illness during his journey back to his camp after the battle. Another theory posits that Genghis Khan may have been poisoned. Some historians suggest that the Mongol leader was the target of assassination by one of his many enemies, possibly from within the ranks of the Western Xia or rival factions among the Mongol tribes. However, there is little concrete evidence to support the poisoning theory, and it is largely regarded as speculation. There is also a more dramatic and legendary theory that suggests Genghis Khan was mysteriously murdered by an enemy, possibly a captive from the Western Xia, who used a special weapon or poison to kill him. However, these theories are often seen as part of the mystique that surrounded the legendary figure of Genghis Khan. Regardless of the exact cause, Genghis Khan's death was sudden, and it left the empire in a precarious position. He had not named a successor during his lifetime, leading to confusion and tensions among his heirs. Genghis Khan's mysterious death fueled rumors, and many believed that he had died too suddenly for the empire to truly prepare for what would come after his passing. His death, wrapped in uncertainty, added to the mystique. Of his legacy, Genghis Khan was not only a conqueror, but a figure whose life and death remained enigmatic. In Mongol culture, the death of a leader was always a moment of great uncertainty. While Genghis Khan had established a relatively stable and unified empire, the future of the Mongol state was in jeopardy after his death, particularly because his vast empire was divided into different regions, each with its own governing systems, military strategies, and local issues. Even though Genghis Khan had named Ogadai, his third son, as his successor, succession disputes and internal divisions among his heirs threatened to unravel the unity of the Mongol Empire. In the aftermath of his death, there was no immediate power vacuum, as Ogadai's ascension to the throne as the Great Khan was largely uncontested. However, as the years passed, tensions began to mount between different factions within the Mongol court, particularly between the sons of Genghis Khan and their respective territories. These rivalries, often tied to the Mongol principle of territorial inheritance, meant that the empire began to experience fragmentation. Although Genghis Khan had established a powerful and unified empire, his death set into motion a slow but inevitable process of disintegration. The Mongol Empire, under his leadership, had been a single, cohesive entity that relied on his military genius, charismatic leadership, and ability to keep his family and generals united. However, with his passing, the empire faced a succession of challenges that eventually led to its division into separate khanates, each ruled by his descendants. Genghis Khan's death in 1227 sparked a power struggle among his descendants. While his chosen successor, Ogadai Khan, was relatively successful in maintaining the unity of the empire, his reign was marked by internal conflict between different factions. Ogadai, as the Great Khan, was tasked with continuing the expansion of the Mongol Empire, but he was also faced with the challenge of managing the competing interests of his brothers and other high-ranking Mongol officials. Although Genghis Khan had selected Ogadai to be his successor, he had not clearly defined the division of the empire. Genghis Khan had divided his territories among his sons, with Ogadai ruling the heartland of the empire, while other sons were given territories in Central Asia, the western regions, and China. Chagatai, for instance, was given the Central Asian territories, while Tolui and Jebi ruled regions in China and the western frontiers. These divisions, while initially based on the principle of meritocracy and loyalty, eventually sowed the seeds for conflict. After Ogadai's death in 1241, the Mongol Empire began to fragment, and it was divided into several major khanates. The Yuan dynasty in China, led by Kublai Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan. The Ilkhanate in Persia, which would be governed by Genghis Khan's descendants, notably Hulagu Khan. The Golden Horde in Russia and Eastern Europe, which was led by Batu Khan. The Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, which was controlled by Genghis Khan's second son, Chagatai. These divisions were not purely administrative, but also military and cultural. Over time, the different khanates operated increasingly independently, with their own systems of governance, military strategies, and economic policies. The central authority of the Great Khan weakened, and internal rivalries between the khanates escalated. Genghis Khan's succession policies, while pragmatic in the short term, ultimately contributed to the splintering of the empire. The Mongol principle of dividing the empire among the sons, although it maintained unity for a time, created the conditions for long-term division. Each khanate became more autonomous and less loyal to the central Mongol authority, and the lack of a unified leadership meant that the Mongols were not able to present a united front against their enemies. The battle for the succession played a major role in weakening the Mongol Empire in the years after Genghis Khan's death. As the Mongol khanates expanded and developed their own interests, they often came into conflict with each other. These interkhanate rivalries further fragmented the empire, and by the end of the 13th century, the Mongol Empire, once unified and indomitable, had effectively split into separate independent states. By the end of the 13th century, the Mongol Empire, once the largest empire in history, had fractured into competing khanates. The lack of central leadership, the ongoing power struggles between the descendants of Genghis Khan, and the vast distances between the khanates made it difficult to maintain the cohesion that Genghis Khan had worked so hard to establish. While the various khanates still maintained a shared legacy of Mongol rule, the empire as a whole began to disintegrate. The Yuan dynasty in China, established by Kublai Khan, lasted until 1368, when it was overthrown by the Ming dynasty. The Ilkhanate in Persia collapsed in the early 14th century, with internal strife and external invasions leading to its downfall. The Golden Horde in Russia faced similar fragmentation, and by the 15th century, it had ceased to be a dominant force. The Chagatai Khanate, too, was eventually absorbed into local powers by the 14th century. Despite the empire's disintegration, the Mongol legacy continued to influence global history. The Mongol postal system trade routes and military innovations persisted for centuries, and many of the cultural exchanges initiated during Genghis Khan's rule continued to have lasting effects. The spread of gunpowder printing and paper-making technologies, as well as the exchange of ideas between the East and West, left a profound mark on global history. The perception of Genghis Khan has evolved significantly over time, shaped by cultural, historical, and political factors. While he is regarded as one of the greatest military leaders in history, his legacy is viewed differently in the West and the East, reflecting the diverse ways in which history has shaped each region's understanding of his impact. In the Western world, Genghis Khan's image has historically been associated with barbarism, savagery, and ruthlessness. For centuries, Western writers and chroniclers emphasized the destructive and violent aspects of his campaigns. The Mongols were often depicted as an invading horde that swept across civilizations with brutal force, leaving destruction and death in their wake. This image was particularly prominent in the Middle Ages when European writers painted the Mongols as the embodiment of chaos and terror. The 20th century saw this perception of Genghis Khan persist in Western culture, where he was often portrayed as an uncontrollable force of nature. Books, films, and media representations emphasized his militaristic tendencies and his supposed desire for global domination. For instance, in some Western narratives, Genghis Khan's actions were reduced to simple conquest, overshadowing his administrative and cultural achievements. His military genius and ability to unite a vast empire were sometimes overshadowed by his more brutal tactics, such as the destruction of cities like Samarkand and Bukhara. However, in recent decades, there has been a growing recognition in the West of the more complex facets of Genghis Khan's legacy. Scholars and historians have started to examine not just his military conquests, but also his innovations in governance, trade, and cultural exchange. While his reputation for brutality persists, there is a more nuanced understanding of his impact, particularly in terms of his role in facilitating global trade and communication. The revitalization of the Silk Road, for example, is now acknowledged as one of Genghis Khan's major contributions to world history. In the East, particularly in Mongolia and other parts of Central Asia, Genghis Khan is revered as a national hero and founder of the Mongol Empire. His military genius, leadership, and ability to unite the Mongol tribes are celebrated as the pinnacle of Mongol identity. In Mongolia, he is not only a historical figure, but also a symbol of national pride and resilience. His image is central to Mongolian culture, and his achievements are considered fundamental to the development of the modern Mongol state. For the Chinese, Genghis Khan is often remembered as the conqueror of the Jin dynasty and the founder of the Yuan dynasty, which brought Mongol rule to China. While some Chinese historical accounts from the time viewed him as a barbarian invader, modern Chinese perspectives tend to highlight his contributions to Chinese history, including his integration of Chinese culture and his promotion of trade. His rule over China is seen as a time of cultural exchange and economic growth despite the violence of his conquests. In Central Asia, Genghis Khan's legacy is similarly celebrated, though it is often viewed through the lens of political unity and cultural flourishing. His unification of the steppe tribes is seen as a triumph of leadership, and the Mongol Empire's role in facilitating trade and intellectual exchange is highly valued. The differing views of Genghis Khan in the East and West can be traced back to historical narratives and political contexts. In the West, especially during the medieval period, the Mongols were perceived as a threat to Christendom, and their invasions were associated with destruction and death. This perception was shaped by the Mongol invasions of Europe, which left lasting scars in regions like Russia, Hungary, and Poland. In contrast, in the East, the Mongols were seen as conquerors who unified vast lands and facilitated an unprecedented period of cross-cultural exchange. Genghis Khan's policies of religious tolerance and his promotion of trade have become key aspects of his legacy in the East, particularly in the context of globalization and the opening of new markets between East and West. Today, both the East and West acknowledge Genghis Khan's role in shaping the modern world, but their views on his methods and motives remain distinct. The Eastern view tends to focus on his unification of the Mongol tribes' administrative reforms and lasting impact on the Silk Road and cultural exchange, while the Western view often emphasizes his military conquests and destructive campaigns. In modern popular culture, Genghis Khan has been reimagined in a variety of ways, reflecting both his enduring legacy and the complexities of his image. From movies to literature to video games, Genghis Khan's character has been portrayed as everything from a ruthless conqueror to a visionary leader. In recent years, there has been a rehabilitation of Genghis Khan's image, particularly in Mongolia, where he has been reasserted as a national hero and the father of the Mongol nation. The Mongolian government has embraced Genghis Khan as a symbol of national pride, and his legacy has been reclaimed by the Mongolian people. Genghis Khan in modern Mongolia. In modern Mongolia, Genghis Khan is celebrated as a unifier and a nation builder. The Mongolian government has taken steps to honor his legacy by renaming streets, erecting statues, and creating museums dedicated to his achievements. His image appears on Mongolian currency, and he is widely regarded as the father of the modern Mongol state. The reclamation of Genghis Khan's legacy has been particularly important in post-Soviet Mongolia, where the Soviet regime had downplayed Genghis Khan's importance in Mongolian history. During the Soviet era, Genghis Khan's image was often overshadowed by the influence of communist ideology, and the Mongol Empire was portrayed in a more negative light. However, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, Mongolia began to reassess its history, and Genghis Khan was reintroduced as a proud symbol of Mongol strength, unity, and resilience. In Mongolia, today Genghis Khan is honored not just for his military conquests, but for his role in bringing together the Mongol tribes and creating a unified, centralized state. His role as a promoter of trade, cultural exchange, and religious tolerance is now emphasized as part of his lasting legacy. Globally, the image of Genghis Khan has been rehabilitated in part due to the growing recognition of his contributions to world history. Modern historians have come to appreciate the strategic brilliance, administrative skills, and cultural impacts of the Mongol Empire. Genghis Khan is now regarded not only as a conqueror, but also as an influential figure in shaping the course of history, particularly in terms of global trade, cultural exchange, and the movement of ideas. Historians like Jack Weatherford and David Morgan have written extensively on Genghis Khan's achievements, advocating for a more balanced and historically accurate view of his reign. These efforts have helped shift the focus from his military campaigns to his long-term contributions to global history, helping rehabilitate his image, especially in the context of modern historiography. Reflecting on Genghis Khan's life, we see a story that is simultaneously one of destruction and creation. His military conquests led to the obliteration of entire cities and the loss of countless lives, but they also paved the way for the spread of knowledge, cultural exchange, and the growth of global trade. His reign facilitated the movement of ideas, gunpowder, papermaking, and astronomy from the east to the west, and vice versa, altering the course of history. Genghis Khan's legacy is not one-dimensional. While he is often remembered for his violence and ruthlessness, he is also recognized for his visionary leadership and forward-thinking policies. He brought together a fragmented world and created a unified Mongol state that for the first time bridged the vast distances between Asia and Europe. He understood that unity, trade, and cultural exchange were essential for the advancement of societies, and he worked tirelessly to establish these principles within his empire. The Mongol Empire, despite its eventual fragmentation, became a bridge between civilizations, one that facilitated the flow of ideas, goods, and technologies. Genghis Khan, through his actions and policies, not only reshaped the political landscape of his time, but also contributed to the modernization of the world in the centuries that followed. Genghis Khan's story reminds us that history is complex, full of triumphs, tragedies, and the unintended consequences of a leader's actions. He is remembered as a great conqueror, but also as a pioneer of cultural integration. A man who in many ways helped bring the world together at a time when such a feat seemed impossible. As we wrap up this exploration of Genghis Khan's life and legacy, I encourage you to reflect on his incredible story. What do you think of his leadership and the Mongol Empire's profound impact on global history? Do you believe the violence and destruction he caused can be balanced with his contributions to trade and cultural exchange? I invite you to leave your comments below and share your thoughts on how Genghis Khan's legacy is remembered today. Do you see him as a hero or a tyrant, or perhaps a combination of both? Your insights and opinions are invaluable, and we'd love to hear what you think. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of history's most fascinating figures, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more content on historical figures, empires, and the events that shaped our world. Genghis Khan's story is just one of many that reveals the complexities of history, and there's so much more to explore. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to continuing our journey through history with you.